Today in this video, I'm going to give you a behind-the-scenes look at how to design a handmade greeting card. But first, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Deb Hoekstra, and I'm a Stampin' Up! Demonstrator who has been making cards for over 20 years. Thanks for joining me. Let's get started and see the thought process I go through when I design my handmade greeting cards. I know that coming up with original card layout ideas is a difficult area for many card makers. It's probably the #1 answer I get when I ask my newsletter subscribers what they struggle with the most. I think it can be helpful to see someone walk through the process, and you might also get some ideas that you can use yourself as we go along. I've already designed the card that I'm sharing today, but I'm going to be walking you through step by step the decisions that I've made along the way. The first design decision I make is always the occasion that I'm making the card for. The occasion can determine the feel of the card. A sympathy card is very different from a birthday card, is very different from a card that you would make for a child or a welcome baby or anniversary. So I always let the occasion or reason for the card be my first design decision. Today, my design decision was made because of the stamp set I chose to use. I wanted to try out this Picture Perfect stamp set in the new 2018 Occasions catalog from Stampin' Up! So by default, my occasion became birthday. The next decision that I usually make when I am designing a card is usually I choose my colors. And I want to say a word about colors. I've had it happen before where I've chosen some colors for a card, and as I'm working with the card, the colors just really aren't working well together. So I want to just say up front, if you're working on designing a card and things aren't working well, abandon or readjust, but don't stick with something that's not working well. In this case, I looked at this page of samples in the Stampin' Up! Catalog. I loved all the bright, cheerful colors, and I decided that I would pick my color palette from some of the colors that they had here. I didn't want to go quite as bright as the Peekaboo Peach and the Lemon Lime Twist and the Berry Burst. So what I narrowed it down to was the Bermuda Bay and the Pool Party ink, or colors. And that's these two colors right here. Those are the two colors that I narrowed my color choices down to. So I know what I'm making the card for. I've narrowed my color choices down to Pool Party and Bermuda Bay. So then the next thing, it was back to the stamp set to determine exactly what stamps I was going to be using from this set. And when I looked at this stamp set, the first thing that really popped out at me were the sentiments. So I decided to make the sentiment the focal point of my card, and I chose this sentiment here, the happiest of birthdays to you. The other element that really intrigued me on this card was this little bow with the shadow stamping, this two-step stamping bow here. So I wanted to include that in my layout, my card design as well. So those were the elements that I chose. So now I have all my supplies chosen. It's time to move on to designing my card. And the first decision for me is always how I'm going to lay out my elements on my card. When I'm working with a new stamp set like this that I'm wanting to focus on the potential of the stamp set, quite often I will choose what I call a go-to layout. And what that is, a go-to layout for me is a layout that I use again and again and again and again because I'm comfortable using it, I like the way it looks, and I have good results when I use it. And I probably have 5 to 6 layouts like that in my card making arsenal. If you want to know more about that process, you can head on over to my blog. I'll put my blog address up at the end of the video and also down in the description area of the video. And then you can do a search for card design principles or card making sketches and learn more about that process. So this is the layout that I decided to go with for my card. A border across the top and then my focal point up here. Which would be where my sentiment was. So I was ready. I have my layout. I have all my elements. So I was ready to get started. So the first element that I decided to work with was the bow, the two-step bow. Sometimes two-step stamping can be a real challenge for me. I get frustrated with the way I lay things out. So I wanted to do that element on my card first and get it out of the way so that while I was fresh and my brain wasn't too tired from all the thinking. So my first decision was what color to stamp the bows, and I don't have the scrap paper here, but I stamped it in Pool Party, thinking that I was going to use the Bermuda Bay to accent the bows, and the Pool Party just was too bland. It didn't pop enough. So I said, okay, I'm going to have to switch my bow to using the Bermuda Bay color. It's a little bit brighter and stands out a little bit more. So that's what I did, but then I had to decide, okay, I need to stamp a shadow stamp here. What color blue am I going to use for the shadow stamp? I looked at several colors. I did some test stamping. I think I looked at Night of Navy, Dapper Denim, and then Island Indigo. And Island Indigo was the color that won out. So that's what I used for my shadow stamping. I want to say a word about the bow placement as well. When you're stamping a line of images like this, I started with the one in the center, and then you can space out. You can figure out your spacing out to either side, and you'll have a nice even bow or even row of bows. So after I got the bows stamped, this background was all white, and it just really didn't look right to me. It needed something else. So I went back to the stamp set and looked at some of the other elements on that stamp set. First of all, I looked at these border images, doing something with them, and I couldn't figure out a way to make them work. So then I looked at these two little, what I would call background images or accent images. One is a sprinkle and one is confetti. Either one of those would work very well for what I was doing. I chose the confetti. So that's what I chose to fill in for my background. Again, Pool Party would have blended in and looked too blah. If I'd gone with Bermuda Bay, there would have been too much Bermuda Bay on this piece. So I chose to go with Island Indigo as an accent color, and it looks really, really nice. So the next decision for me was what to do with the border. So I had a piece of scrap cardstock there as my border, and actually I think I actually had white there. So I put a piece of white down, and then I put my border that I'd stamped there, and I looked and I said, I think that's just a little bit too blah. It just kind of sits, there isn't enough pop and pizzazz to it. So I said, what if I put a border behind it? And that's what I did. And I decided that I really liked that pop of color that the Bermuda Bay, again, it's Bermuda Bay bringing out the Bermuda Bay accent and just popping it. So I liked that, the look of that. So at this point, I considered bringing in a contrasting third color, Berry Burst, and doing something like that with the border, and that would have been very pretty. I really would have, that's a very nice third color, or actually fourth color accent to bring in. But that wasn't quite the look that I was going for on this card, so I decided to just leave the Berry Burst out of the equation and just go with the Bermuda Bay, but either way would have worked very, very well. So next it was time to move on to the sentiment, and for that I decided to stamp that in Island Indigo as well, for the same reasons as I went with Island Indigo here. I thought Pool Party would be too dull. I already had quite a bit of Bermuda Bay, and I was using the Island Indigo as my accent color. So that's why I went with the Island Indigo for the sentiment as well. But don't be afraid to experiment on scrap cardstock. That's what I did. I stamped a couple experiments on cardstock just to see what I would like. So my next decision was what to do with this sentiment piece. And when I had it sitting like this, I decided that the rectangle was too boring and dull, and it just didn't look right. It was too square looking. So I decided to try some framelits on here to see what that would look like. This is what I do when I'm trying to decide a shape for a sentiment. I lay the framelit over it and look at it, what it would look like on the card. And I really like the look of that oval. It's a possibility. So I'm going to just slide that framelit up there and say, okay, that one is a possibility. The next thing I thought of was maybe a circle. So I tried my circle dies here. And this one obviously wasn't big enough for the sentiment. So I have to go to the next bigger size, which I'll bring over here. And that one works really well for the sentiment. I didn't give myself enough room on this paper to use it for a circle. So if I were planning to use a circle, I would have to restamp the sentiment. I'm not going to use it though, and this is why I'm going to explain why I'm not. If you look at the distance here between the fold and the border, there really isn't a lot of breathing room for that circle in that layout. It looks too cramped, and a lot of space here, but not very much space vertically. If I were going to use a circle with this layout, I'd almost have to, and as wide a border as I have, I'd almost have to flip the layout this way. I'm going to show you here what I mean. And put my circle there. And then that gives me a lot of breathing room around that circle, and it gives me enough room that I can maneuver the elements and make it feel like there's space to breathe. So, but this is the way I wanted to do my card layout. And so obviously the circle isn't going to work for this one. So the other framelit that I tried was this Lots of Labels framelit. And that one fits the sentiment really well as well. So I had a decision to make. I had to decide whether I wanted an oval or whether I wanted a Lots of Labels framelit. What I liked about this framelit was it added a little interest with these swirls on each of the edges, as opposed to just having an oval with all the same shape edge. So that was my deciding factor in which framelit to use, and this is the one that I chose. So I'm going to bring this over here, and we're going to pretend that this is stamped on here. My next decision was, do I want to have a mat or not? And I decided that the mat really made the sentiment piece pop. So I decided to go with a coordinating mat of Bermuda Bay. Okay, we're going to pretend that there's a sentiment on here. I have this upside down because I don't want to show my finished product yet. So we'll pretend that there's a sentiment stamped on here. My next decision was, do I like it like this, or do I need to bring a mat in and put behind the sentiment? And I decided on a mat. I thought it tied in nicely with the mat that I put behind my border piece, and it just looked a little bit more finished with the mat. So that's what I went with. And then here's what it looks like with the stamped sentiment on it. And I liked the way it looked. I'm covering up my little embellishments I put on there because I wanted you to see what it looked like without those. So I liked the way that it looked, but I thought, is there something more that I can do to just step the card up a little bit? It looked kind of flat to me. It looked kind of So I thought, what could I do? And I thought about the little enamel embellishments that Stampin' Up! Sells in the different colors. So I decided to try, and this is what they look like. You get hearts and stars and circles. I decided to try those on there, and I really liked the way that putting one on each of the little bumps here looked. So I decided to go with that. The other thing I decided to do, and I'm going to lift this up here, was to go sponge around the edges of my sentiment very lightly. You can barely see them. But by doing that sponging, it kind of blends. It kind of makes the white not be so stark against the Bermuda Bay and blends the two together. So that is the result of my design process. This is the card that I came up with. I really, really like the way it turned out. After I sat and looked at it for a while, though, I thought, you know what? I want to add just a little bit more sparkle. So what I did was I stamped another row of bows. And I'm going to hold this up here. I don't know if you can see the Wink of Stella, but I added Wink of Stella to the Bermuda Bay bows. And I'll put that down on the card. And when the light catches it just right, it sparkles and it adds a really nice touch of very subtle bling to the card. So that's it. That's my walk through my card design process. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found something helpful in seeing me design a card and seeing what my thought process is. You can visit my blog, www.bbugcreations.com, and there I post fairly regularly every Monday and Wednesday card projects, design ideas. I've done some series on card layouts that you can check out. I'd love to have you come visit me there. You can also sign up for my newsletter, my weekly newsletter there. There's a sign up form on the right sidebar of my blog. So I hope that you'll take some time to connect with me there. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them down below this video or in the comment section of my blog. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.